Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the Celtic Down Under weekend review. My name is Anthony McGuire and joined, as always, with Paul Massey as we look at Celtic 5, Falkirk 2, quarterfinals of this, League Cup. League Cup, we're at the semis. Quite an eventful match, Paul. Plenty to talk about, plenty to digest over the next hour or so. Fresh in our minds from last night, 10 o'clock kickoff Perth time. But before we get into that, how was your weekend, Paul?
Yeah, it was good, mate. Long weekend here. I believe you were probably working, but for mere mortals, a 3-day weekend can never be a bad thing. So yeah, just a bit of family time, bit of catching up with friends, family. Probably the most dramatic thing that happened over the weekend, other than the football, was took my dogs to meet some other mates and their dogs that we used to hang out in this park we used to meet in way back a few years ago. Just a bit of a catch up, let the dogs sort of run around. R2 promptly decided to leg it into the duck pond, which is probably at least 75% duck shit, and came out there like light colored dogs, cream colored dogs that came up like balayage, pretty much blacked from well, depending on the taller one was he'd been swimming actually, so he was even worse than the other. So that was eventful. Thankfully, there was a friendly neighbour with a hose pipe out the side that was able to lend us that, so they got at least a bit of a hose down before going into the car. But yeah, they were not in the good books. Both needed a bath on top of the hose down. Lunch plans had to be cancelled. Generally, it was they were not in the good books for a couple hours. But yeah, suffice to say that all has been forgiven. But yeah, apart from that, pretty tame weekend. Just catching up with friends and family, and spend a bit of quality time with the missus and the dogs.
Fantastic. No, I took the Friday, so I had a long weekend of sorts, but just the other way around. So I went down to see my family down south and got to spend some time with my little 6-month-old nephew, Jack. So that was great. Plenty of cuddles with him. And I had his two guardian chocolate Labradors, Millie and Lottie, giving me a bit of a handful. So one decided to jump into bed in the morning and one nearly chewed my sunglasses. But apart from that, we're all friends. And it was, eventful weekend there. And then gardening and then watching Celtic. So it was nice. But yeah, work today wasn't too bad. It was just pretty quiet for a public holiday, as these things tend to be. It's beautiful weather, so it's obviously everyone's out and about and not going to the pharmacy, which is fair enough. Smell the Glove is saying that he's on to his second Aussie pod of the day. Thank you very much for joining us. Very much appreciated. We are live, so feel free to get your comments in the comments section, and we'll endeavour to get them discussed as we go along. Paul, in the group chat, you were sort of talking maybe about 2 or 3 changes. I'd sort of outlined Carter Vickers and AJ would definitely be wrapped in cotton wool after our exertions in the Champions League, and we will interweave the Champions League result into our analysis tonight. Fantastic result, 5-1 in Europe. That doesn't happen very often, or it's never happened before. So fantastic result, but obviously dropping down to lower league opposition in the League Cup. AJ was spotted in Manchester, so we're pretty confident that he wasn't going to be participating in the match at all. You were sort of thinking a couple of changes. I was thinking probably wholesale. I thought Rodgers would use this as an opportunity to have a look at the squad, and lo and behold, he did. And obviously with variable results depending on which players we talk about. So Paul, I guess first things up, team lineup, obviously probably a little bit of a surprise for you, but take it away.
Yeah, so I was pretty bullish in the week that I thought there would be 3 or 4 changes max. The 2 that you mentioned, probably Ida and Bernardo coming in, they are the 4 that I thought would happen. Rodgers doesn't tend to do what he did yesterday, which is a wholesale change of the squad. He tends to keep his core players in play. So I thought he'd kind of stick to form. Obviously, I was proved wrong on that. That's fine. And then from there, I guess there's two schools of thought on that as well. So you go, well, you make the wholesale changes. Look, I guess from a Rodgers' point of view, it's a free hit to some degree, because he has obviously made a call that if it goes well, it goes well. Great, doesn't have to bring on the big guns. If it doesn't go well, he thinks he's got a deep enough and strong enough bench to get it done, and that's what sort of eventuated. So yeah, I thought he would sort of revert to type and only make 4 changes, try and get it done inside a half, 60 minutes,
take them off,
then take off, key players, and flood the pitch with guys that haven't had a lot of game time. He went the other way. He made 8 changes, so that, yeah, a bit of a surprise. The only guys that survived were Schmeichel, McGregor, and Hatate. So that was a little bit of a surprise to me, especially in the case of Rio Hatate, because I thought he would be a cert for a rest after a good performance in midweek. And look, there was no poor performers in midweek. But yeah, I thought he would get a rest, and he looked like he should have had one. To be honest, he didn't really play anywhere near his level. But that's probably something that could be leveled at most of the team in the first half, with the exception of probably Paulo Bernardo. So yeah, I think there's been I've specifically, I try and keep away from too much analysis, because obviously I wanted to kind of this to be kind of true to my gut feeling, but you can't help but sort of feel a kind of, at least a sort of wave of thought process. If you keep a little bit of an eye on social media, and it seems to be that the heavier weighting camp, at least on social media, seems to be, oh, there's no way you should have made that many changes. There's a massive gap. It's not like just the usual negative stuff that you get. Now that might have, that was probably in the immediate aftermath. In the 24 hours or so since, maybe some of that has got a little bit more introspect and thoughtful. My view is, as I say, he took the gamble. He would probably have wanted those fringe players to go and really stamp their authority on the game, really put their hand up for a place and a jersey, and put a bit of competition in. And that's what you would have hoped. And if that had come to fruition, it might not have been completely seamless, but you'd have expected a bit of a performance and sort of to push on, and probably keep some of the big guns in reserve and just give them a day off from the bench. As it happened, that's not what happened. It was disjointed. It was really pretty, poor for large parts, pedestrian, not dissimilar to this time last year, was one of the observations I made. But the depth is so much bigger than the past. So he only has to give those guys half an hour and they still get the job done. So you'd say it's, it's a gamble worth taking. He's probably a little bit disappointed in the result, to be honest. Not in the match result, but in the result of how those fringe players fronted up when giving us that. And we'll get into the nitty-gritty of those players as we go. But yeah, that's my overall kind of initial snapshot of how that went. I've got no real grievance with him making that amount of changes. If you don't do it, you're not going to see how it might pan out. The only other point I make at this point on it is, if you make that amount of changes and throw that amount of players in for the first start, which I think 6 of the 8 was the first start of the season, it's not really going to give those players the best opportunity to show what they can do, because they're all new to it. There's no real cohesion. You've made all the changes. They haven't got the benefit of just being one cog that swaps into already firing machine. You've pretty much changed the whole machine. So I don't think it's real. My theme of this will be, I don't really think it's the place to judge too many of those players on that performance alone, because there's extenuating circumstances in it. However, there's 1 or 2 that you would probably say really have been a little bit disappointing, but we'll get to that.
Very expansive answer there, Paul. Thank you. Yeah, look, I expected the changes. I thought Palmer would get a start. You'd rest Kuhn, bring in Forrest, presumably, or Yang. I thought maybe Stales would retain his place at the back, just to give the back 4 some semblance of stability. I figured he'd replace the fullbacks. Obviously, we knew CCB wasn't going to be playing. I thought he might have put Solo in, but I think he hadn't trained, so I think that's probably why Casper Schmeichel retained his spot in the team. Midfield on paper, that's a strong midfield three. Nothing wrong with that. And then obviously when we eat out front, which is fair enough as well. I guess I take your point, Paul. I think there's two camps in terms of when you make that number of changes, you've got players who are making their debut. So obviously Alex Valley, left back, it's a little bit getting thrown in the deep end when you get your first start, but it's basically with a completely different team. So, he's one for me, and we'll touch on it, we'll get into it, but, he's one for me that I think should get a bit of an asterisk beside his name, in the sense that, I'll be keen to see what he can do when the other 10 players are your usual starting 11. Whereas someone like Stephen Welsh, who's played plenty of times at centre-half, it's a different scenario. Like, he's played that position umpteen times, and, he looked all at sea. So for me, there's a difference there between those sort of positions. I think, we'll pick each player apart because, got the time to do it. But you're definitely thinking that there's players there who had an opportunity to maybe put some pressure on the starting 11, and they've kind of shot themselves in the foot because, you're playing against, in theory, lower level opposition. But in fairness, they've put the best performance at Celtic Park from an opposition team that I've seen in a long time. Like 50-50 possession, 2-1 up at half time. When they actually did get the ball, they tried to play it. Calvin Miller, ex-Celtic player, getting in and about it. I mean, they just had a purpose, and, they tried to play football. And, you compare that and contrast that to the Hearts game the week before, where you had a team that basically was anti-football, and they're supposed to be third in the league, sitting bottom, near bottom. Stephen Naismith's just been sacked. I think Brendan Rodgers' comments after the match are fair enough. Everyone's going to always dig at Rangers, but, on paper, that's, not even on paper, to the eye, they played the best football I've seen against Celtic this season, probably even into last season as well. Like, they took the chances, and it put us under the cosh. They were pressing us more than we were pressing them. And I think out of everything, that's probably the most disappointing aspect, I think, from the match, is that our intensity at the start of that game wasn't there. We weren't counter-pressing. You compare that to how we counter-pressed against Slava Bratislava during the week. Night and day. And I know Kyogo, Maeda, and Engels were your three main, and Kuhn were your sort of main harassers there, and you've taken them out of the team. But surely the lads who are stepping in must be watching that, saying, well, that's how the manager wants us to play. And there was just none of that intensity. And, Ida, his post-match comments were like, we took them too lightly. We lowered the levels. We didn't get to the heights of the Champions League game. And it just shows you that if you go in there half-hearted, it doesn't matter who you're playing against, you might get found out. And I think you're right, Paul. Rodgers will be disappointed because he did have to dip into his bench to get the job done, because it was night and day. 60-minute onwards, it was like flick a switch, and it was like, oh, here's Celtic come to play. But we'll get into it. So bright start, early doors. James Forrest forced an early save on the 3rd minute. I think it was really early, and and it forced a save from the keeper. And I'm thinking, okay, well, we've started reasonable enough, but before we knew it, we're 1-0 down on the 11th minute. And talk us through the goal, Paul, because there's also a few comments about potential fouls in the lead up and things like that. But just talk us through your thoughts, because I've got a few sort of observations as well.
Yeah, so I think it starts out on Falkirk's left, and it's a pretty poor effort at press from both Anthony Ralston and Callum McGregor. They stand off, and to your earlier point, that was absolutely the tale of the half. The pressing wasn't there. We were too pedestrian, too one paced, and just give them too much time and space. Guy plays a good cross in. into the sort of inside right position, just inside the box. I think Alex Vaid is okay at that point. He gets him. He sort of uses his strength. He gets in front of the striker and wins a header. And sort of, it's not a very powerful clearance, but he gets the first contact and he knocks it away. Now that knocks it into space. At that point, there is a tug. There's a wrestle. It's pretty minor, but typically you would expect it to be blown up in this day and age. Like, it doesn't take a lot. And I thought generally the ref blew up quite quickly and quite soft, at other points in the game. There was multiple times he did that thing where, the Falkirk player claimed a foul and grabbed the ball, and that pretty much decided that it was going to be a free kick. So there was a fair bit of soft free kicks going around, but he wasn't willing to give that one. And look, you can argue the toss about VAR, but as we've seen this season with VAR, if they pretty much stick with the on-field decision. So I'm not going to argue the toss too much about that. I don't think there's not a huge amount in it. I've got more concern about how we defended it as a whole. So Trusty's getting a fair amount of grief, and there's two things here. You can go, well, yeah, he should be rushing out to press that, and he probably should, but he's a little bit off balance because he's what I think is the right thing is he's moved to cover behind Valley in the estimate or assumption that if he doesn't win that ball and he gets out muscled, then the guy's in on goal. So his job as the centre back is to go and cover his man. So he's dropped a yard or so to do that and taken a step in that direction. So he's then quite a distance from the ball when it drops. I still think he should react and start to put some pressure on. But the biggest culprit here for me is Rio Hatate. He's actually started to jog up the pitch away, and I don't know whether he's just not spotted the guy who scores, McIvers that scores is there, or if he just thinks, well, that's not really my job. He's an attacking player. Somebody else should pick him up. But if he just scouts that a little bit better, he's the closest player to put pressure on that, and he's just kind of not there. And from there, it's a good hit. He gets a clean strike on it, but there's zero pressure on him. And yeah, just all round, as is usually the case with a goal being lost. If you want to be hypercritical and hyper analytical, which is what we do on this show, is we analyze the game as we see it. There's 4 or 5 culprits involved at various stages in that. And yeah, Valley getting a fair amount of grief online, but I think he's probably amongst the least culpable, to be honest. You've got Ralston, McGregor, Trusty to some degree, and then yeah, Hatate probably the biggest culprit in terms of lack of picking up. But yeah, just a poor goal. And you'd think, well, give ourselves a shake, but we did get a response, but not really to the level you would have hoped and expected.
Yeah, no, McLaughlin P saying that Valley's clearly pulled back. I think I've seen those given. And I mean, if that goal had been disallowed because there was a foul on Valley, I think you'd be like, oh, it's a bit soft, but you see it given. So the fact it's gone the other way, I agree with you, Paul. Like, you're not going to VAR re-refereeing those types of decisions. Or, well, sorry, this season we're not going to see VAR re-refereeing those decisions. Last year we probably would have done. So, again, all right, we're lucky because obviously we end up winning the tie, but there's obviously a mismatch in size, and this is where Valley's obviously learning his game because he's probably technically very gifted, and he obviously links up with Bernardo for the opening goal with a deft header. So the guy's got ability and he's got skills. I mean, he's on Barcelona's books, but of course he's a footballer. But it's just developing that strength and that size and be able to play defensively, which obviously is wise at Celtic because he's obviously going to have to develop and learn that. And I dare say he'll be better for that run out. As a consequence of that. But yeah, I agree, Paul. The one I wanted to single out there was Hatate because yeah, he should have been at least heading in the direction of the guy with the ball, but he was like heading in the opposite direction. So I'm like going, yeah, that's pretty inexcusable. But you're right. The lead up pressing was rubbish. And yeah, everyone just seemed too far off it. And I think when you've got a back four that's never played together before, you've got a settled midfield, and then you've got a forward line that's not played together much either, I just think your spacings aren't quite right. And you're just the gaps were there. And in fairness to Falkirk, they were exposing those gaps. I mean, a lot of other teams wouldn't have been brave enough to do anything with it. They would just have humped the ball at the park and reset for another defensive phase. But they were exposing Celtic's, frailties in that first half. So you've got to take your hat off to them. My father here saying, not that comment. Sorry, this one here, he was saying, let's be honest, if we had our first 11 out there, we wouldn't even be talking about Falkirk would have battered them. Yeah, well, we would have probably battered them, but Rodgers made that decision, and here we are, and obviously we're analysing the game that was in front of us, or that happened. So, as you say, Paul, we got a response, but 10 minutes later, when we equalised, like you say, it probably wasn't quite as emphatic as maybe we're expecting, but we had a clipped ball in from Hatate, which was probably his main contribution for the match. Valle's just managed to get a nice cushion header down, and Bernardo's come in, not breaking his stride, and pumped it in on the volley. And good response. You could see that Bernardo was trying, and for me, he was definitely our best player on the part in that first half. Like, he was putting himself about, and he was trying. He went close to scoring a second as well. There was the one where he was dribbling and just couldn't quite get the ball in front of his, in front to take a shot, sort of thing. But he definitely looked like he was up for it, in comparison to Tate and McGregor, who I also thought had a poor match by his standards. But we equalised, one each. Okay, we're back in the game again. Apart from that Bernardo one, we started dribbling through. Did we really create any other real main chances the rest of that half? Nothing's really.
Not really. No, I think if anything, they probably had even before the goal, they had probably the next best chance, you would say, which is that one where he kind of had to sort of rearrange his feet and sort of did a bit of a half volley, but couldn't keep it down, and it sort of just went over the bar. That might have even before we equalised. I thought I could have put him 2-0 up at that point, and yeah, we were just quite rocky, and it looked like we were going to see out the half, and at that point you'd have probably expected the right act to be read and a different team to come out, but obviously we then leaked another one.
Yeah, and that, I think the defense and the defense for this goal was more criminal, or is that the right using the right English? But Ralston's tucked in to mark Welsh's man, left the guy open at the back stick. And like I said, it was pretty easy pickings. I mean, he still did well with the header, but I mean, free header from there, you got to at least hit the target, and did better than that. He scored, but
Valley's weak in the challenge as well, though. He's looking for a foul. Like, there's a bit of a tussle, and there's a bit of an arm goes back, but there's leaving less than that, and there is in the first one. So he probably needs to learn that that you don't really get those very much if you're a Celtic player. So he goes down looking for it, leaves his man completely clear. It's a good ball in. It's a really good ball in, and it's a well cushioned, steered header. But again, under zero pressure. To your point, Ralston's got sucked in to mark somebody else's man. He leaves the back stick completely spare. And look, again, there's obviously a rustiness there. These guys haven't played a lot of football. But you can tell they're not taking up the right positions. They're not really sharp and on it. Tony Ralston, when he's on his game, like, okay, he's not as good a footballer as Alistair Johnston, and that's why he's the backup. But when Ralston's on his game and up to speed, he's brilliant in the air. He defends the box really well. He'd be putting himself through that player to clear it, and he's obviously just rusty, not at it, and switched off, and he's got caught. So yeah, just generally pretty poor. And yeah, I think it's pretty much injury time in the first half when that goes in. So there's no chance to even respond. And yeah, if you think the right act was getting read prior to that, then I wouldn't be surprised if Rodgers had a few raised words of colourful language at that point, because it was pretty poor.
Yeah, well, I think the other factor here is obviously the pressing was poor, but a lot of Celtic's build-up and a lot of our success, in Europe during the week was Greg Taylor as an inverted fullback or AJ on the overlap with Kuhn. And neither of those were happening really to any extent with Valley and Ralston. So you're sort of, both your flanks weren't really functioning like you weren't really giving you the service. So Ida was quite isolated. A couple of times where Ida did manage to sort of pick the ball up and hold it up. But again, he felt like he was holding it up for an eternity, waiting for someone to get near him, which hasn't really been a Celtic's play. You know what I mean? Like usually when he holds it up, there's bodies streaming left, right. Usually there's 2 or 3 options. Like you've almost got too much choice as to who you're going to hit. But I kind of felt it was a couple of times in that half where he did actually do the right thing. He held it up, showed you had composure and strength. But then you're thinking, where's the help? Like, you know, and that for me, again, that desire to get forward wasn't there either. And you're thinking, well, yeah, this is where Palmer is trying to come in for some harsh criticism, because he was woeful. Like he was really bad. He, as you say, Paul, in the group chat, he hit the first couple of corners or free kicks, and he got taken off them quick smart. And then there was a couple of crosses he tried to put in that were terrible. And yeah, I know it winds my dad up, but every time he makes a mistake, he just does this big stupid grin, like, oh, everything's all right. And it's like, mate, like you've got to pull your finger out here. Like this is your golden opportunity to put a bit of pressure on Dies and Maeda. But, you know, Maeda be watching that going, well, there's no danger of me losing my spot. James Forrest is James Forrest. Like, you know, he's going to give you what he gives you. And I don't think James Forrest had a particularly bad game. I just think he had a particularly good game. But yeah, we're definitely that left wing position. If something was to happen to Dies and Maeda, you'd be a wee bit concerned, because we don't necessarily have a ready-made, you know, backup there. I feel at the moment, you know, like I said, Valley, you said, yeah, a bit light on, but early days with him. And then Ralston's Ralston, like you know what you're going to get with Ralston, but I think Ralston with a totally makeshift back four, Forrest in front of him, it's a slightly different dynamic than, you know, obviously when Kuhn comes on and you get a bit more dynamism in the team and a bit more movement. So, yeah, that. And then I guess, as you say, Paul, the right act would have been read at half time. But then for me, that 10, 15 minutes after half time was just the same guff that we saw in the first half. And that was probably the thing that really concerned me the most. It's like, well, he's given you 10, 15 minutes here to pull this, you know, get this back in on track sort of thing. Otherwise, he's trying to bring the changes. You knew at 60 minutes he was trying to make changes. But I kind of thought, well, he could have done that at half time, but he's obviously given them 10, 15 minutes to sort it out. And they haven't. And you know, I can't think of any real notable chances before the substitutes were made, and it was just more of the same. A big Dom here, he feels it summed it up a bit, sort of saying that we've got depth that, you know, maybe we thought we had depth, maybe we don't. It is interesting, Paul, that he seems to gravitate towards Welsh over Narosti. I know Narosti's been injured, but obviously he makes an appearance later on, which again, I'm probably jumping ahead a little bit. But, you know, there's a comment a bit further above about, you know, maybe we won't see as much CCV this season as we're thinking. We're a bit of a worry, given that, you know, if CCV's in a moon boot after playing a game, and, you know, there's obviously they're trying to manage him, which is fine. But, you know, we're going to have a replacement there. I mean, you're thinking probably Stales and Trusty at this point, but I know Stales isn't your favourite player, Paul, but, you know, he's man of the match midweek, scores a goal, put a couple of critical headers out to clear his lines. I mean, it's a competition for places working in that spot, at least. Like, is he performing because he knows there's someone breathing down his neck in Austin Trusty?
Well, you can only assume so. You can only assume so, right? We spent 6 million on what is supposedly Scales' replacement, and yeah, I'll be absolutely transparent. I was critical of Scales, and I stand by the criticism because it was valid at the time. Equally, I'm big enough to agree that there's been a remarkable improvement. Now, some of that credit will go to Liam Scales himself, of course. He's putting in the work and he's clearly progressing. A lot will go to the manager because he's clearly working with him because he looks way more composed. He looks more relaxed. His decision making is better. He's just generally making fewer mistakes. So the progress is huge. Like, you only have to go back to the sort of Aberdeen semi-final where he got caught under 2 high balls and he got beaten at the back post for 2 headers and we lost 2 goals and went to a penalty shootout. And then if you look at his performance from that day to now, it's light years apart. So he's done some work. The manager's done some work, but absolutely having the pressure of a £6 million potential replacement breathing down your neck is it focuses the mind. He didn't have a challenge for his place last season. He was guaranteed his shirt all season unless he got injured. Now, even if you're the most focused individual, there's a level of complacency that will come with that. So, yeah, Scales has been great. Can't fault him. Certainly can't fault him the other night. He was well worthy of his man of the match award. And you notice the difference. And to your earlier point, you would suggest that Welsh would have probably been better with Scales next to him. And Valley would probably been better with Scales next to him as well. So I can't really give him much more of a compliment than that. I think one of the real, you've covered a load of the issues really well. The only other one I would add is just around shape. We didn't play with anywhere near as much width as we normally do with the two on each side with Forrest and Ralston, and even worse between Valley and Palmer. We effectively, we weren't really using the full width of the pitch. The wingers usually hug the touchlines. You'd be lucky if they were as wide as the 18-yard box. And in turn, that then squeezes up the space for other people. And yeah, you're right. The 3 banks between the attackers, the midfielders, and the defenders were too spread out. So it was, that makes passing harder because you've got to pass further to get him to where you want it to be. So there were more passes getting going astray. I thought Valley's come in for a fair amount of criticism. I thought he was neat and tidy for a lot of what he did. Like, he clearly a technical player. His passing was good. His athleticism looked good. It was a great little header to cushion into Bernardo's path for the goal, and it's a brilliant finish. Yeah, he was muscled a couple of times. A couple of passes went astray. But I've seen some really harsh criticism of his performance, and I think that's a bit much given who was immediately around him. So yeah, I think biggest criticism would probably be just how the team shaped up, and then because they weren't really positioned where they should be, there was much more. Palmer, for example, he'd be running in between 2 defenders and asking for the ball. He's not going to get the ball there. He should be hugging his touchline, making space out there, allowing Valley to come through the middle. I think Rogers touched on it in the, I think was it maybe the Slovan Bratislava game. Like, okay, we started like a train, but it was only 1-0 at half time. And one of the things he said is just positionally we were a bit out. Yeah, we sort of on top of each other a bit. It was a bit like that. Like there wasn't really the right structure to where players were, and therefore instead of being able to pass forward and through the lines, they looked up, there wasn't an obvious forward pass, so they would come back and recycle it. And I think that's kind of what was going on last season at this time. Like I said, that first half performance could easily have been from any number of games in the first 2 or 3 months of last season, even the first half of last season. So yeah, I think it was pretty disappointing, and even worse, as you say, that there was no real reaction after presumably getting a rocket at halftime. And yeah, so 2-1 with half an hour to go. You never really, the big guns are coming off the bench, and you think, well, they'll dig us out of a hole, I'm sure. If you need it, there's extra time. And then, as we know, sort of a 14-minute blitz, 4 goals in 14 minutes, and it should have probably been 5. There was that one that Bernardo had the chance, and it sort of broke, and Engels had a crack at it, and then it broke again, and it didn't quite, nobody could quite put it in. But yeah, we should have probably scored 5 in 15 minutes. But that would have been harsh on Falkirk. I think by the time the big guns came on, I think somebody said it in the comments, and maybe I can't remember who it was. Somebody mentioned in the comments they'd put a ton of work in. So yeah, it's easy to say that if the big guns had been playing from the start, would have smashed them. We probably would have wore them down. Would they have gone into 2-1 at halftime? Probably not. But John McGlynn had them really well drilled and really well set up, and he deserves a lot of credit for that. They're on a 43 league game unbeaten streak. Now, obviously, they were playing in the division below. They're playing in League One last season, and they came up, and now they're top of the championship. I think 5 wins out of 5 or 6 wins out of 6, something like that. So they've been a really good run of form. McGlynn had them playing well. He took the game to us, but yeah, they were gassed. They were gassed by about 60 minutes. So between that, and us sort of lifting the levels and bringing, I don't know, the guts of 20 million quid's worth of talent off the bench, it's going to make a difference, right?
We'd hope so. It definitely, obviously, it did in the end. But yeah, you must be, as a Falkirk player, you're thinking, we're 2-1 up against Celtic, half an hour to go. And then you see Big Engels just ready to come off the sidelines. And you're going, so you must just be like, that just psychologically must just sort of deflate you a wee bit. But yeah, I say within 10 minutes, we found our mojo, as it were. I'm just going to run through a few of these comments, Paul, because there's just a few, actually some really good chat going on here. So Mesh was asking how much did Rocky cost. So I think the plan was for him to warm the bench. So I think we spent 4.4 million according to McLaughlin P, same as Scott Brown. And then the other comment was there's one here just saying that the young Spaniard had Maeda in front of him. It would make the world of difference. Yep, I think that definitely is a fair point. And then what was the other comment I wanted to bring up? There was one more. Here we go. And it was just, if players don't get game time, what do you expect? And this is the problem for Celtic and teams with big squads, is that there's no reserve league. So these players aren't kicking the ball at the training, yes, but they're not actually getting any sort of real meaningful game time. So it's hard for them just to jump in and play and expect them to play at the highest level that, obviously Celtic showed in Europe during the week. However, I think some of the minimum prerequisites have got to be, well, you've got to play to the formation and the structure of the team. The team identikit is pressing, counter-pressing, moving the ball quickly. And they were all the things we weren't doing. So that, to me, comes back to the fact that, we're playing Falkirk. They're a division below us. This is going to be a cakewalk. We just beat a team in Europe. This should be pretty straightforward. And subconsciously, whether they meant it or not, a few of them have obviously gone in there, dropped their bundle a wee bit, and they've been found out. And unfortunately, football is a great leveler. You can't get away with that. And, obviously, it took our bench to sort of dig us out a hole. And, obviously, the 4 changes came on were Yang, Engels, Taylor, and Kuhn. And you couldn't argue any of those substitutions. They were all, for me, spot on. Hatate was off the boil. Taylor down that left-hand side would just give you a different dynamic and basically give you another midfielder. And then Kuhn, well, he ended up being the difference maker. But Adam Ida, he gets on the end of a Nicholas Kuhn cross, very, very close to being offside, but the run was timed really well. It was actually a ball through from Anthony Ralston, if I'm not mistaken, that found Kuhn. He sort of crawled it round the Falkirk defenders. It was actually a really good ball forward. But yeah, Kuhn was on the left side, actually, wasn't on his usual right. And Big Ida gave him a bit of service, and lo and behold, he'll score a goal. But that was like literally the first cross, I think, that actually came to him. It took the 70th minute for that to happen. And then, as you say, Paul, you got two in the space of 2 minutes. So, it just shows you that, the big guy, if you feed him, he will put them away, because he's finishing for his 2 goals was tight. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, no, it was great. Yeah, both Kuhn and Ralston on the left-hand side for that goal. So I didn't take notes at the time, and the the highlights didn't show the preamble, but I'm assuming there was a corner or something over that side.
Taylor was sweeping, so he was in the sweeper position, and then Ralston was obviously at the back. And it must have been the ball came across, and somehow Kuhn was on that side. But yeah, must have been a corner.
Yeah, just quickly going back to the earlier points, the bare minimum you would expect is commitment and effort, and it wasn't there from some players. So on that basis, that's a pretty big issue. I've got no issue with players being a wee bit rusty and their touch being off and just not being quite at the sharpness that they are. But in terms of a bit willingness to run around a bit and put pressure on players and move into the space, and as you say, follow the sort of general tactics. They're there all season. They're in the match room. They're on the training pitch. They should be completely across that. Ida's first finish. Tap in. Kuhn does the hard work. Well, to be honest, Ralston's ball probably does the hard work. It's a good run by Kuhn. After that, he's just got to square it, and then Ida's just got to make sure he stays on side. It took a long time on VAR, and on the eye, you were like, well, you're probably just hoping he's in line with the ball because he looked like he was in front of Kuhn. Now, obviously, those angles aren't great, and we know that VAR up here is, costs 5p and worked with a crayon. So who knows, really, if he was off or not. But yeah, we got the benefit of the doubt on that, as you probably should as the striker. So it's a well worked goal, gets us level. And then the second one just hot on the heels. I think to the point where our group chat, we were talking about two different. I think you were talking about his first one. I was already talking about his second one. But again, yeah, I think play must have only just restarted, and it gets it down the wing to Kuhn, and he just plays a little simple square ball. He gets an assist for basically a simple a pass as you can, because basically Ida does the hard work after that. And if you're on a Falkirk podcast tonight, you probably bemoaning the defense for that, because he doesn't really do much of a trick. He just sort of shuffles it slightly. He just shuffles it and runs between them, and they kind of, I don't know how they managed to get nothing on it. I guess they're scared of any contacts.
Giving away a penalty.
Yeah. But once he's in, he tucks it away really nicely, and that's three good finishes in a few days. And yeah, at that point, the world's changed in the space of 2 minutes. We've gone from 2-1 down with 20 minutes to go to 3-2 up with 18, 19 minutes to go. And yeah, there's only one team going to win from there. And we obviously kept the foot down and added another couple.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, once we were in full flow, obviously Falkirk's head goes down. We've got our tails up, and the ball's zipping around again. It's like you're watching the sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Not the post-mortem, but like the tail end of the European game. It's sort of like a little add-on.
Yeah,
there's a word for it though. I can't think of the word right now. An appendix, maybe. But yeah, addendum. Yeah, so it's just a little bit at the end. But yeah, it's just like a little flash of, if you missed Wednesday night, Thursday morning, this is sort of what we were doing. So we got a couple more goals. Kuhn with a brace, and again the wee man was on fire. He just sort of tore through them as if they weren't even there. Strike for his second goal was pretty good. Keeper sort of beat, but like I said, job done. 5-2. Looks like it was an easy day in the office, but I'm sure there was a few Huns quietly doing a wee rubbing the hands at 60 minutes, going, maybe Celtic get knocked out here, but no such luck, guys. We're through. So yeah, like I said, so in the end up, you sort of go, we got away with it. Rogers made the right changes, and the impact was there. But again, it comes back to squad management and sort of saying, well, are we as strong in those positions, like backup positions, as we think we are? And yeah, so say right, just for argument's sake, say Maed is injured, he's unavailable. Would you be okay with having Palmer as your left winger based on what you saw last night? I think the answer there is no.
Well, no, you wouldn't. And to be honest, you'd be looking at Yang, because in the half-hour cameo you had, and let's
he
be
looks
clear,
he looks like he's bulked up. Did you think he looked a bit?
He looked like he'd been working in the gym. I guess. Let's be clear, like whether it's Palmer or Yang, and I think Yang's the next in line, it's still a massive drop off from Maeda. But I think the thing about Yang is he was willing to go inside and outside, as opposed to Palmer, who just always cuts in. Absolutely, as far as I'm concerned, Yang did show enough to leapfrog Palmer and kick on as support. At least for now, this is the benefit. This is the benefit of having a big squad is that can change quite quickly. But Yang's put himself, I think, ahead of Lewis Palmer on the basis of half-hour cameo versus Palmer having an hour, which was pretty ineffective. He had that one shot that was a bit straight, but still in the keeper's hands. He couldn't hold on to it. But yeah, he was lively. And this is the season, at least this season, even maybe next, that you expect some kind of progress from Yang. Like he played way more games last season than he was ever sort of expected to because of issues with the squad and fitness and various other bits and pieces. He was bought as, to use the cliche, a project. He wouldn't have expected to have a lot of game time, but he had to be relied on and used longer than was probably the plan. And, we've strengthened most parts of the pitch. The wide positions, maybe not enough. Obviously, Kuhn was a big strengthening, albeit it didn't really look like it at the end of last season. So I guess that's another point that's worth making on some of these guys like Trusty and Valley. It is, Kuhn came in January. He obviously had some health issues. He'd lost some weight. He took an age to get up to speed. And he looked okay in flashes, but the player we're now looking at, the same could be said for Liam Scales. The player that we're now looking at in Kuhn and Scales are a light years apart from the players that were playing in the second half of last season. So let's not write anyone off too quickly that we've only seen 60 minutes from. But yeah, there's a couple of those players that have been around the squad for a while, in some cases like Welsh for many a year, that have probably, not really enhanced their position in the squad. And the problem with that is you could hear the crowd, some of the crowd starting to get on the back of a player like Stephen Welsh, because, it's a bit like Mikey Johnston. You're around a long time. You never really kick on. Yes, you've not had a lot of game time, but there's not much to hang your hat on in terms of progress. And in both cases, I think they stayed too long because they're Celtic fans ultimately, and therefore you want to make it at your own club. But the weight of that pressure becomes really heavy as well. So it's a difficult one. I'd love to be a fly on the wall or unpick Brendan Rodgers' sort of notebook on how Welsh is ahead of Nawrocki in terms of the next cab off the rank for the centre back, because to the earlier point, 4.4 million, he was bought to be CCV's partner, and he's between injury and presumably a lack of form or what we see on the training pitch, he's never really shown that. And on the odd occasion he's played, he's looked good on the ball, a bit weak in the challenge, and not as quick as you would hope either. So I'd have liked, obviously we signed Trusty. I'd have liked us to sign another centre back as well, and potentially got Welsh of Nawrocki out the door, to be honest. But maybe that was not as straightforward as I hoped. And we can be quite positive about a lot of the transfer work in the end. But one of the things about leaving it is late in. I think there was a comment from Rodgers. He was asked a direct question about Stephen Welsh in the last week or so of the window. Is there some interest in Stephen Welsh? Is he going to be staying or going? And he sort of said, well, it will sort of depend on, I'm paraphrasing, but I think he said he's here for now. It will depend on other things. So clearly there was no definitive decision that he was getting kept. It was more that on overall squad depth, it was decided that he needed to be around the building. But I would say we're probably still one centre back light unless Nawrocki can push forward, because I don't think Welsh is really going to make the grade.
I have a bit of sympathy for Welsh because he's not had a lot of game time, and his development's probably been stunted to a certain degree because he's not gone out on loan. He's always been the covering centre half if he had an injury or whatever. And in fairness, when he's been thrown in, he's usually done a job if required. But for his own development and his own sort of, to play football, I mean, is he happy sitting on the bench every week and being part of the squad and that's it? Or is he a guy that maybe he needs to say, well, I'm going to go away and see if I can get some first team football elsewhere? But yeah, there's a comment here saying that we've got to stop picking on, players that have Celtic fans have a history of picking on players. I mean, I think every club to an extent has fans that do that, but I'm not, he wasn't alone. his biggest criticism was giving the ball away and being a bit lax in his passing. And as soon as Rossi came on, I felt his passing was sharp. By that point, there was not really any defensive duties left to do because the game was effectively over. It was over by that point. But
it's not just a passing shot. It's just like too many touches. A bit like Scales when last season he was taking 1, 2, 3. Too many touches. I absolutely agree with you. Like Stephen Welsh has sort of been a victim of the fact he's had to hang around for cover. He would have. Look at Tony Ralston. I think he only went
at one point. But at one point, Lazio or someone was interested in signing him.
Udinese, I think. There was a couple of Italian league, Italian Serie A teams were interested, and I'm sure his game would probably suit out there. And there's lots of Scottish young players gone out there and done well. Like he'd have absolutely benefited from some time on loan somewhere. Look, even Tony Ralston, he went out to, was it Dundee United and maybe one other club, and he just got a bit more minutes, and he is further ahead as a first team ready player, albeit he's only cover than Welsh is, and that part of that's because he's had more minutes. But yeah, it's a bit of a difficult one because he is. I don't know how old he'd be, 24, 25 maybe by now, or I think he'd be he's not a really young player anymore, I don't think. So if he maybe we add cover for next season and he goes out and he has one season out on loan, but I think we've seen a lot of him, and I don't think there's quite enough that he's at the level that we would want to. But I was one of the people that said that about Liam Scales, and now he's winning man of the matches consistently in the Champions League.
But to your point there, Paul, like Liam Scales is a bit of a beneficiary of circumstance, because there's no way he'd have got that much game time if we hadn't had the run of injuries at that position. So he quite easily could have sat on the bench, potentially been sold to Aberdeen and never stayed at Celtic. But a sliding doors Gwyneth Paltrow moment, like he might not have got the game time that he got, and then he might not be the player he is now. But all right, part of that's development and man management, whatever. But then part of it's like you got to be almost have a bit of luck and take your chances when they present themselves. And I think that's the one thing you can say of Liam Scales is that he stayed fit. And for centre halves last season at Celtic, there wasn't maybe he was the only one I think that pretty much didn't miss a game through injury. Everyone else was out at one point or another. So sometimes it's circumstance and fortune, and you got to take your chances. But he wouldn't have had the development that he'd had we not had the run of injuries that we'd had as well. So as much as we've developed this player, it was through necessity rather than through good planning or good fortune or whatever. But
absolutely. But a big chunk of opportunity in football is taking your chance when you get it, and you might only get 10, 15 minutes. And that's why it's so disappointing. Some of these guys were given 60 minutes and they didn't, like Lewis Palmer, case in point, 60 minutes. You'd think he'd be playing it out of his skin. And I just didn't see it. I didn't see it. He tracked back occasionally and looked like he wanted to win it. And he made a couple of mistakes and he did track back, but it wasn't consistently operating as you would expect. Now, look, it's a high bar to match Daizen Maeda's work rate, but if that's your direct competition for a place, that's the bar. He's pushed the bar higher. You've got to try and meet that. Now, it's unlikely you're going to meet that, but missing it by a mile isn't going to work either. And as I said earlier, commitment and effort should be the bare minimum. If his passing's not quite crisp and his crossing's not quite as good as it normally would be, fair enough. He's not had as much game time, but pressing and organization and taking up the right position, like I say, he wasn't even hugging his touchline, giving players options to feed him in. He was making life hard for Trusty and Valley because he wasn't taking up the right positions. He wasn't showing openly for the ball. So it'd be interesting to see what happens to Lewis Palmer from here. I wouldn't imagine that he will be high up the list for a reserve jersey or a subs jersey anytime soon. I think Yang showed a lot more energy and interest that he might be next in line.
Well, I'd say Yang's performance was more comparable to a Kuhn or a James Forrest when he's on it, whereas Palmer was playing his own game. Basically, he was doing something different to everyone else, and it's like
that's kind of what he does, though. That's been a criticism for that was my criticism of last year when he wasn't at his best. Was he pretty much? He's a bit of the Lewis Palmer show about him, and we can see that from the TikTok and the social media and all that. Like he needs, like he's got a brilliant opportunity, and he's at the minute he's throwing that away.
squandering.
And look, the only sympathy I might have for him is I don't think he's really a winger. I think he's a 10, and we don't really play with a 10. He's a second striker. We play off the front. That's not how we play. So he either needs to
limited opportunities.
Yeah, and so he's not going to play. He's not a. We play with 2 8s, so you might call him 2 10s, but I don't think they're more like 8s. They're box to box midfielders. He's not going to take that position because he hasn't got the work rate. And we don't play with a luxury 10 that just floats around and does creative stuff behind the striker. So he either plays with the discipline and organization of a winger, or Celtic's not the place for him under Rodgers, at least, because that's not the formation we have. I can see Mahesh saying Palmer should play inside as a 10. We don't play a 10 in the traditional way that he would play it, a mercurial sort of floating around behind the striker 10.
He's no Tom Rogic.
No, and even well, yeah, and even Rogic put more of a shift in than I would see Lewis Palmer doing. So we play with effectively 2 8s. Occasionally, one of those will play slightly higher. Like Hatate has been. He's not really playing as a sort of 10 in the play, but he's been playing as a 10 as a second presser. But we don't play a kind of old school 10 like a Maradona that floats around behind the front and does what he wants. And I think that's what obviously South American. That's probably what he wants to do. Is he wants to Central American, but yeah, he wants to do that sort of kind of creative thing. And it's not this. Mahesh said play him as an 8. Do you think he's going to work hard and back all the way back in defensively and be a structure? I just don't see it from him. He's going to have to dislodge Bernardo, Hatate, and Engels for that. He's got no chance. So he either finds some discipline and plays as a winger, or he's going to find himself even further out of the fringes. So yeah, it's all in Lewis Palmer's hands, to be honest. But at the minute, he doesn't. He looks like he's dropping down the pecking order, not up.
All right, time's running out, so I just want to run through a whole load of comments that I starred from throughout tonight's chat. There's a few interesting comments, so I bring them up. The other point I wanted to make earlier, and I forgot about it, was we better sign Greg Taylor on a new contract because he seems a bit harder to replace than more than meets the eye. Transformers.
Hugely underrated. Hugely underrated player.
Swell their glove, he's saying here, Hugh Keevins is now linking Rodgers with West Ham. Yeah, that's what happens when Rodgers is doing well. He gets all the links to the EPL jobs. I think somebody said here, John McGlynn should be considered for Celtic manager vacancy when Brendan leaves. Well, I tell you what, there's a few Premiership clubs looking for managers at the moment who should consider John McGlynn because they could do a lot worse. And then somebody's half expecting Levine to take the Hearts job on a temporary basis, but he's already taken soup from the BBC. He's back on pundit duties there. Not like, he's his coffee's not even cold from the last time he was there, but there you go. Job for the boys, as per always at the BBC. My old man's just saying here, Dortmund, Bruges, all got battered. Leipzig drew, so it shows you what happens after Europe. So, yep, you've got to maintain those levels of performance, definitely. And then McLaughlin P made a comment here saying that he was reminded of a Scottish Cup tie versus St Mirren in the Invincible treble season. Division 1 at the time and held to 1-0 lead up to the 60-odd minutes that day. And then Brendan said that they were the best side he'd faced that season. Well, definitely a few parallels and symmetries compared to yesterday.
Yeah, Hamish Carton mentioned that on his show as well. So yeah, that's it's a good similarity, I think. Yeah, with 1-0 down, and I think it finished 4-1 that day. Pretty much similar spread, 15-20 minutes of goals. Not quite as late, I think they started, but yeah, good observation.
Paul, man of the match.
Well, I'm wearing a German top, and it's not that difficult. So yeah, Nicholas Kuhn, 35 minute cameo. 2 assists, 2 goals, just an absolute handful. And he's been, we've had lots of standout performances this season that have really sort of shifted the dial. But but he's right up there as a key player. So yeah, really excited to see what he can deliver this season. And suddenly, from a player who lots of people were far from impressed with at the outset, looks an absolute bargain at 3 million. So yeah, long may it continue. So yeah, my man of the match is Nicholas Kuhn.
Well, I had him as my man of the match last week. I'd almost go close to saying he was close to my man of the match during the week as well. But yeah, no, I agree. Honourable mention to Paulo Bernardo. I thought of all the players who stayed on the park, he was definitely the one that was trying. And on another day, he could almost have a hat trick himself. As he said, that opportunity late on, but there was one in the first half as well. So, but again, popped up with a goal. His deliveries for the corners that weren't bad either. So, I think fair enough. But yeah, definitely Kuhn. I think somebody's made a comment here just saying that they had to put Michael Stewart in the other room at the BBC when they had Craig Levein in. They're obviously still not talking with one another. Far out. Get over it, lads. And then somebody's saying here that Hamish read his comment. And then
that's the St Mirren. That's the St Mirren likeness. So yeah, so there we go.
And yeah. So there we go. Paul, what's music recommendations? Other recommendations?
Just before we do that, one last thing on the game. Interesting to see where Paulo Bernardo goes from here, because I thought he didn't really put a foot wrong in the derby. I thought he was a bit unlucky to get taken off as early as he did in that match. He was a standout performer on that basis, and made a man of the match in that game. He then obviously lost his shirt to Rio Hatate. Hatate proved that was the right decision, and it's played well, and he played well in Europe. I think these two will be tussling it out for a jersey all season, and there'll be bits and pieces of form come into that, but there'll definitely be tactical stuff comes into that. Now, as a big groundswell seems to be saying Bernardo should take the jersey off Hatate based on their two performances yesterday, and on the face of it, that's a reasonably logical thing to suggest. For me, I think there's a pretty good chance Bernardo starts against Dortmund. So if that's the case, do you give him a bit of a rest and you only use him from the bench against St Johnstone next week, and therefore have the luxury of keeping him fresh? He's just going to be a bit more tight and structured and technical, and probably better at retaining the ball than Rio Hatate, and I think that's going to be really important against Dortmund. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how Rodgers goes. He could completely say, "Nah, Hatate's my better player of the two, and I'll start him in Europe." So Bernardo gets the game against St Johnstone, or maybe Bernardo gets a run from here, and it's up to Hatate to fight his way back in. Who knows?
Well, it's interesting because we agreed. We thought Bernardo would get the nod for the Bratislava game, thinking that we needed that control, and then end up Hatate was the better call because we battered them, and we had the lion's share possession. But I think it's pretty optimistic to think we're going to have a lion's share possession against Dortmund over there. So that maybe our comments for Bernardo hold more weight this time around. And then, like you say, it's like, well, if you're going to play him against Dortmund, then you've got to at least start him against St Johnstone and get him some game time. Maybe not play the full game, but definitely, But like I say, it's a good problem to have, I guess, is what we're coming back to, is that we've got 4 ready-made starters for 3 positions. And pretty much every other team in Scotland will be champing your hand off for options like that. So remains to be seen, I guess. And then the other thing I wanted to say, Paul, just there's a guy called John Attenborough. He's visually impaired, and he on the weekend went to Station Park, and that's him now been to 42 out of 42 league grounds in Scotland. So he was awarded a plaque from the SPFL. So that was a nice touch from them. And his guide dog Sam was there for all 42 visits around the grounds. So
I've been following him. Yeah, I've been following him on social media for a good chunk of the last season. He was very complimentary about Celtic, actually, in terms of the facilities we have for visually impaired fans, in terms of audio stuff. One of the better clubs around for that. He's been at Celtic Park a few times, actually, I think, because he's enjoyed that experience as much. I think he's definitely seen the women's team a few times. I'm not sure if he's made it along to a men's game as well, but yeah, he's been very complimentary about that, and he seems to have really sort of embraced yeah, having a crack at these grounds, and yeah, well played. He seems to have rattled it off in nearly no time. So yeah, I think he was getting some interviews with the BBC as well. So yeah, no, fair play to him. Well done. You want me to go straight into my recommendation of the week?
Please.
Yeah. So music recommendation of the week. I've mentioned this guy before, but his third studio album came out last month. And I've been meaning to share it for a little bit, but we've been inundated with quality albums in the last few weeks, so it's taken me a month to get to it. But it's a guy called Hamish Hawk, and his third studio album, A Firmer Hand, is well worth a listen. Probably the best influences you could say are Morrissey, The Smiths, Neil Hannon, sort of Divine Comedy, and maybe a bit of Jarvis in there at times as well. So yeah. Pretty honest lyrics. I'll leave you to find out about that for yourself. But yeah, Farmer Hand by Hamish Hawk is my album recommendation of the week.
Just one other point of order. The women's team did win 1-0 in Europe as well. So congratulations to them. So that was a good result. It was pretty, very tight match. There wasn't many shots on goal, and it was very, very, yeah, got the result. That's the important thing. My only recommendation was the Grand Tour had their finale, so it was their final episode. They did Zimbabwe. They ended up back where they started 17 years ago, when they first started doing those sort of tour events. So Clarkson, Hammond, and May. But yeah, worth a watch. But they got a bit teary. I was like, yeah, fine, whatever. But it's it was a good way to sort of for them to sign off because they've. So I'm actually amazed how much of the world they've actually done. They put a map up near the end, and there's not many countries that they actually haven't been to. So I mean, it's I suppose they kind of tapped out, going, well, there's not actually much left to actually see or do. So, but yeah, if you're into that sort of thing, that final episode is up on Amazon Prime at the moment. That is us. Thank you everyone in the comments section. Please like the episode on YouTube. It helps other like-minded Celts find the show. We'll be back next Monday night after the St Johnstone game. That is going to be at ridiculous o'clock. I think that's 12:45 Perth time, if I'm not mistaken.
It's a daft kickoff, isn't it? Sunday night. It's a real treat for us in the early hours of Monday.
We're going to be struggling for you, but we're going to do it because we're the consummate professionals that we are. Richard will be back from his holiday jaunt. He's down in Tasmania at the moment, so he should be. Said it was freezing, but he should be back on air with us next week. So we'll be back to a panel of three. So thank you very much, Paul, for joining me. Thank you everyone for listening. And all that's left to say is hail, hail.
Hail, hail.